His hands still carried the grease from work when a knock came at the door, asking for help with a car that wouldn't start anymore. She stood in the driveway, keys trembling between her fingers, and the engine let off a smell that didn't fit that ordinary afternoon. Before we dive into this story, drop a comment below with a rating from 1 to 10 and let us know what town you're tuning in from. May this moment bring reflection and emotion to your heart. The afternoon was too hot for late autumn, and the street's asphalt still held the heat from earlier hours. He crossed the few yards separating his house from hers with his old shirt clinging to his back, bare feet slapping the warm pavement, a wrench already in his hand by instinct. It wasn't the first time someone had asked for car help in this neighborhood where everyone knew each other by name and by their troubles, but it was the first time she had asked. The new resident, the woman who had arrived 3 weeks ago with few bags and many silences. When he reached the garage, he noticed she held the keys as if handling something fragile. Her eyes scanned the exposed engine with a strangeness that went beyond mechanical ignorance. It was as if she was seeing something that shouldn't be there, something that scared her more than it should. He bent down to look under the hood, and that's when he saw it. Components that didn't belong in that type of car. Parts that cost more than 3 months' rent on that street. Marks he'd only seen in specialty magazines, never under the hood of a common sedan parked in a simple garage. He didn't say anything. He just checked the cables, tested the connections, cleaned the battery terminals with motions he knew by heart. As he worked, he felt her gaze on his back, heavy and attentive, as if measuring every gesture, every word he didn't say. The silence between them had texture. It wasn't uncomfortable, but it carried weight, as if both knew some truth was being avoided. "Must have been the battery," he said finally, wiping his hands on an old rag. "Sometimes the terminals get corroded with humidity. It's common." She nodded, but the relief on her face didn't match the simple explanation. It was too much relief, as if he had solved something bigger than an electrical problem. "Thank you," she said, her voice low and careful. "I don't know what I would have done if you hadn't come." He shrugged, putting his tool away. That's what neighbors are for. But when he turned to leave, he saw her close her eyes for a second, as if trying to believe it. As if the word neighbors was something she hadn't experienced in a long time. In the following days, he started noticing things. Not on purpose. It was the kind of attention that comes on its own when something doesn't quite fit. She walked down the street at the same times every day, but never looked directly at people. She'd nod a greeting, smile if necessary, but kept her distance. The kind of polite distance of someone who knows how to measure social spaces with surgical precision. And there was the watch. He saw it when she pulled back her sleeve to get the mail. It wasn't the kind of watch someone forgets to take off. It was the kind that's hidden. His daughter, Laura, was 9 and had the natural curiosity of someone who hadn't yet learned to feign indifference. She was the one who mentioned it first. "Dad, the lady in the blue house is weird." He was frying eggs, the oil sizzling in the pan. "Weird how?" "She doesn't have any plants, or pictures in her windows, or anything. It's like she doesn't really live there." He carefully flipped the eggs, thinking Laura wasn't wrong. The house looked inhabited by someone who could leave at any moment. Minimal furniture, curtains always drawn, no sign of roots. "Maybe she's just reserved," he said, but the word sounded weak even to him. "Or maybe she's hiding something," Laura replied with that childlike conviction that sometimes hits closer to the mark than it should. It was a week later that he saw the first strange car. A black sedan, dark windows parked on the corner for too long. It didn't belong to anyone on the street. He knew all the cars. This one just sat there, engine off and nobody getting out, just waiting, watching. When he passed by heading to work, the car started and sped off, fast, deliberate, and somehow that confirmed what he had been feeling without being able to name. Something was happening that no one understood yet. That night, while helping Laura with her math homework, he heard a knock at the door. Light, almost hesitant. When he opened it, she was there, holding a covered plate. "I made too much," she said, not looking directly at him. "I thought maybe you guys would like some." It was a simple homemade cake, but made with a precision that betrayed practice. The edges perfectly golden, the frosting distributed symmetrically. It wasn't the first time she had done that. It was probably one of the few things she knew how to do in this new world where she had chosen to live. "Thank you," he said, taking the plate. "Laura will love it." She smiled, but it was a small, almost timid smile. He realized then that she didn't know if she was doing it right. Didn't know if this, offering food, being a neighbor, participating, was something that belonged in the place where she was now. "You can come in if you want," he offered, but she was already backing away. "No, another time. Thank you." And she left quickly, as if afraid to stay too long. Inside, Laura tasted the cake and made a face of approval. "This is too good to be from someone normal." He chuckled, but the phrase echoed. Normal. What was normal? And why did this woman seem to be trying so desperately to be something she wasn't? 2 nights later, he woke up to a noise. It wasn't loud, but it was out of place, the kind of sound that doesn't belong in the dead of night on a quiet street. He got up slowly, went to the window, and saw it. Her house had all its lights off, but there was someone outside, a silhouette standing on the sidewalk, staring fixedly at her bedroom window. The figure didn't move, just watched, as if confirming something, calculating. He thought about going out, yelling, doing something, but before he could decide, the street lamp flickered, an old city defect no one ever fixed, and when it came back on, the figure was gone, as if it had never been there. The next day, he ran into her at the corner store. She was buying the basics: rice, beans, oil, nothing eye-catching. He approached, feigning casualness, but noticed she was trembling slightly as she pulled coins from her wallet. "Is everything okay?" he asked quietly, just for her to hear. She looked up, and for a second he saw it. Fear, pure and contained. But she quickly composed her face, like someone who had learned to hide entire storms behind a calm expression. "Yes," she said, her voice firm. "Everything's fine." But it wasn't. He knew, and somehow she knew he knew. When she left the market, he stood in the aisle, holding a can of corn he didn't need, thinking. There was something about that woman that called for protection. Something in her that seemed to be fleeing a place where protection never existed, and he, accustomed to fixing broken things, to keeping everything running even when it threatened to collapse, felt for the first time in a long time that perhaps there was something beyond a car engine that needed repair. Something no tool could reach. Something that he suspected was about to explode. The following weeks brought a routine that wasn't truly a routine. It was more like a rehearsal, a careful attempt to build normality where there had only been improvisation. She sometimes appeared at his door with small excuses, missing sugar, a borrowed tool, questions about how trash collection worked on the street. Transparent pretexts that both pretended to believe, because neither wanted to name what was really happening. She needed his presence. Not romantically, not invasively. It was something simpler and deeper. She needed someone to confirm that this place where she was trying to live was real. He, in turn, began to realize that helping her had become part of his day. Not because it was an obligation, but because there was something in her that awakened an instinct he thought he'd lost after Laura's mother left, an instinct to care, to be present, to perceive what wasn't said. Laura, with Her child's vision, that hadn't yet learned to lie to herself, accepted the neighbor's presence with a surprising ease. Perhaps because she recognized in her something similar to what she sometimes felt. The sensation of trying to belong somewhere that doesn't always seem to have space for you. Or perhaps because, at that age, she still believed that every person carried a good story waiting to be discovered. One afternoon, when he came home from work with grease-stained hands and a body heavy with fatigue, he found the two of them sitting on the front steps. Laura was drawing in her notebook, and the neighbor just watched with that way of hers, like someone who doesn't quite know what to do with their hands when they have no task to occupy them. "Dad, Marina taught me how to draw real clouds," Laura announced, holding up her notebook proudly. Marina. It was the first time he'd heard her full name. Until then it was always the neighbor, the lady in the blue house, her. Now she had a name, and names carry weight, names create bonds. Marina smiled, but it was a smile crossed with something he still couldn't decipher. Gratitude, perhaps, or fear that it could be taken from her at any moment. "Do you draw?" he asked, trying to sound casual, as he took off his boots on the porch. She hesitated. "I used to, a long time ago." It wasn't a lie, but it wasn't the whole truth either. He had already learned to recognize that tone. It was the tone of someone who edits their own life before showing it to others. That night, after Laura fell asleep, he stood at the kitchen window, drinking reheated coffee and looking at the empty street. The blue house had a light on in a bedroom. He saw her silhouette pass by the curtain, always moving as if she couldn't stay still, as if the silence of the night brought something she needed to avoid. It was then that the car returned, the same black sedan, same dark windows, parked in the same spot, like a sentence waiting to be carried out. He watched, hidden in the dim kitchen, and saw when her bedroom light suddenly went out. As if she knew, as if she was waiting. The car stayed there for 20 minutes. No one got out. No one rang the doorbell. It was just presence, silent threat. Then, unhurriedly, it started and disappeared around the street corner, swallowed by the darkness. He couldn't sleep well that night. The next morning he found Marina at the gate getting the mail. She held a large sealed envelope with no sender. Her hands trembled. Not much, just enough for an observant person to notice. "Good morning," he said, trying to sound normal. She turned quickly, hiding the envelope behind her back. "Good morning." Silence, the kind of silence that precedes confessions or escapes. "Did you see the car last night?" he asked directly. She turned pale. She didn't answer immediately, just looked at him as if measuring how much she could say, how much was safe to reveal. "I did," she admitted finally. Her voice was low but firm. Sometimes they show up." "Who are they?" She took a deep breath, looked around as if the trees might be listening. "People who are looking for me. People who think I should be somewhere else. And you don't want to be in that other place." It wasn't a question, it was a statement. She shook her head slowly. "No, I chose to be here." There was so much conviction in those words that he understood this wasn't an escape born of desperation. It was a choice, difficult, costly, but a choice. And that changed everything. "If you need anything," he said, not knowing exactly what he was offering, but feeling he had to offer, "anything at all, you can knock on the door, no matter the time." Her eyes filled with something he couldn't name. It wasn't exactly tears, but it was close. It was the kind of emotion that gets caught in your throat when someone offers something you no longer expected to receive, solidarity without questions. "Thank you," she whispered, and this time it sounded like she believed it. The following days brought a subtle change. She started going out more, not much, but enough to seem less like a ghost and more like a person. She talked with Mrs. Jenkins, the lady on the corner. She bought bread at the bakery and spent a few minutes exchanging pleasantries with Mr. Peterson, the baker who knew everyone's business. Small gestures from someone trying to belong, someone who wanted to be seen as an equal, but the oddities persisted. One day, he saw a well-dressed man standing across the street, talking on the phone while looking directly at her house. Another day, it was a woman in a business suit, too elegant for that neighborhood, jotting something down in a notebook before getting into an imported car. These were brief appearances, but frequent enough to create a pattern. Someone was mapping her life, documenting, waiting, and she knew. Of course she knew. One Saturday afternoon, he was fixing Laura's bike in the garage when Marina appeared. She carried a thermos. "I brought coffee," she said hesitantly. "I thought you might want some." He accepted it, wiped his hands on his pants and poured a mug. The coffee was good, very good, made with care. "I learned to make it when I lived," she began, but stopped. "Edited, when I lived somewhere else." He took a sip, waiting. He didn't push. He just left the silence open, in case she wanted to fill it. "I grew up in a place where things were different," she continued, looking at her own hands. "Where everything was measured, planned, controlled. And I always thought that was protection. But it wasn't. It was a cage. And you ran away." She laughed, but it was a joyless laugh. "I ran away, or I tried to run away. I don't know if anyone truly manages to run from where they come from. But you're trying." "I am." He looked at her, really looked. He saw the fine lines around her eyes, signs of sleepless nights. He saw her careful posture, as if every gesture needed to be thought through beforehand. He saw her simple yet well-maintained clothes. Everything about her was a contradiction. She wanted to be invisible, but couldn't completely erase who she had been. "You don't have to tell me everything," he said. "But if you ever need to, I'll listen, without judgment." Her eyes welled up, and this time she didn't try to hide it. It's been a long time since anyone offered that. Offered what? To listen without wanting something in return. That hit him in a way he hadn't expected, because it was true. In her world, whatever it was, nothing came without a price. And she had learned to distrust anything that seemed generous. When she left, he stood in the garage, holding the empty mug, thinking there was a much bigger story happening here. A story involving power, money, control, things he never had and never wanted. But now he was in the middle of it. Not because he chose to be, but because sometimes life puts people in our path and we have to decide, turn our backs or stay. And he, without knowing exactly why, had decided to stay. That night before bed, Laura asked a question he didn't know how to answer. "Dad, why does Marina always seem scared?" He pulled the blanket up to her chin, thinking about how to explain something he didn't fully understand himself. Sometimes people carry heavy things from where they came from, and it takes a while to let go. But will she be able to let go? "I don't know, sweetie. I guess it depends on how many people help her hold the weight until she can." Laura thought about that for a moment, her big eyes processing its complexity in a way only children can, without judgment, just accepting. "So we help her, right, Dad? We help. Because that's what neighbors do?" "It is, and because it's the right thing to do." Laura smiled, satisfied, and turned on her side, hugging the worn teddy bear she'd had since she was a baby. In minutes, she was asleep, with that ease of children who haven't yet learned to carry the world on their shoulders. He stayed there for a few more minutes, watching his daughter sleep, thinking about how strange life was, How a simple gesture of helping with a broken car had turned into something so complicated and at the same time so necessary. How sometimes we don't choose the battles we're going to fight. They just show up at our door asking for help, and we have to decide whether to open it or pretend we didn't hear. He had chosen to open it, and now he was in something that went far beyond fixing engines. He turned off the light and went to his own bed, but sleep was slow to come. He lay looking at the ceiling in the dark, listening to the sounds of the night, crickets, a distant dog barking, the wind in the trees, common, familiar sounds. But there was something more, a tension in the air he couldn't ignore. He got up, went to the window. Outside, the street was silent. The houses slept, lights out, everything calm on the surface. But when he looked at the blue house, he saw a faint light moving inside. Marina, awake. Probably couldn't sleep either. Probably reliving memories, facing fears, trying to find strength to carry on. He thought about crossing the street, knocking on her door, offering company. But he knew it wasn't the moment. Some battles have to be fought alone, at least for a while, until the person is ready to share the burden. So he stayed there at the window, keeping watch from afar. It wasn't much, but it was what he could do. The gay light in the blue house moved once more, then went out. Marina had finally gone to sleep, or at least tried to, and he returned to bed, pulled up the covers, and finally let exhaustion win. Outside, the street was silent, but it was a watched silence, a silence that waited, a silence that knew something bigger was just beginning. November arrived, bringing rains that filled the street with puddles and left the air smelling of wet earth. It was the kind of weather that made people stay indoors longer, looking out the window, waiting for the sun to return. But it was also the kind of weather that brought neighbors closer, that created excuses to share a hot coffee, to lend an umbrella, to spend a few extra minutes chatting under a porch awning. Marina began to become part of that rhythm. Not completely, never completely, but enough so that her presence ceased to be strange and became expected. She helped Mrs. Jenkins carry her groceries when the rain picked up. She brought homemade cookies to Mr. Peterson, who repaid her with fresh, still warm bread, and increasingly she appeared at his house with small offerings. A cake, a casserole she'd made extra, a book she thought Laura might like. He noticed she was making an effort, not just to be accepted, but to learn to live that way, without servants, without chauffeurs, without anyone to solve things for her. There was a humility in that was both touching and sad, as if she were relearning how to be a person. One afternoon during a heavy downpour, when a storm caught him returning from work, Marina was already on his porch with a towel in her hands. He hadn't even knocked on his own door yet. "You'll get sick," she said, offering the towel before he even asked how she knew he was coming. He accepted, wiped his face, and noticed she had made coffee. The smell came from inside the house, where Laura was drawing at the kitchen table. "She let me in," Marina explained, as if needing to justify it. "Said you wouldn't mind." "I don't mind," he confirmed, taking off his drenched shirt right there on the porch and putting on the dry one he'd left on the covered clothesline. When they went inside, Laura looked at them both with that smile of someone who knows something the adults haven't quite realized yet. "Marina made coffee just the way you like it, Dad, with 2 sugars. He looked at Marina, surprised. She shrugged, trying to appear casual, but the blush rising on her face gave away that she had paid attention, that she had remembered that detail as if it were important. "Thank you," he said simply, but with weight. They stood there in the small kitchen while the rain drummed on the roof and Laura returned to her drawings. It was an ordinary, everyday moment, but there was something about it that felt rare. A quietness that didn't need to be filled with words, a presence that was enough in itself. It was Marina who broke the silence first. "I never had this," she said, looking at the mug in her hands. "This simplicity. I always thought it was something I lacked, that needed to be corrected. But now I see it was the opposite. It was what I needed most, and never had." He took a sip of coffee, thinking about how to respond. "Simplicity isn't the absence of problems," he said finally. "It's just another kind of problem, smaller perhaps, but still heavy." "I know," she agreed, "but at least here the problems are mine. Not as surnames, not expectations I never asked for. They're mine to solve, and that makes a difference." Laura looked up, curious. "Do you have a different last name, Marina?" The silence that followed was thick. Marina looked at him, asking for permission or perhaps for help. He nodded slightly, leaving the choice to her. "I do," Marina answered slowly. "But I like being just Marina better. It's easier that way." Laura accepted the answer with the ease of children who haven't yet learned to be suspicious. "Me too," she said, going back to her drawing. "Last names are annoying to write." The tension dissolved with the innocence of that, but the moment remained marked. It was the first time Marina admitted, even if indirectly, that there was something in her past big enough to be hidden. When the rain passed and Marina said goodbye, he stood on the porch watching her cross the street. She walked differently now, less tense, her shoulders a little more relaxed, as if each day in that place made her less like who she had been and more like who she wanted to be. But as she entered her house, he saw it. The car, not the black sedan this time. It was a grey SUV, tinted windows, parked 3 houses down, and inside he could make out the silhouettes of 2 men. They weren't looking directly at her house, but they were there, always there, like shadows that never detach. He mentally noted the license plate. He didn't know what to do with it, but it seemed important. It seemed like the kind of information that, at some point, could make a difference. The following week, the first real incident occurred. Marina was at the town square market buying vegetables when a man in a suit approached her. He wasn't from the area. That was clear from his clothes, his haircut, the way he looked around as if he were in an exotic place. He stood a few feet away, watching her choose tomatoes, weigh potatoes, haggle with the vendor. He only approached when she was leaving. The single dad saw everything from afar. He had gone to get oranges on the other side of the market and, by chance, had a perfect angle to witness the scene. He saw when the man touched her arm. He saw when Marina turned, startled. He saw when she recognized who it was, and he saw, most importantly, fear returning to her face like a mask being reapplied. They talked briefly. He couldn't hear what they were saying, but their body language told the story. He spoke with authority. She recoiled with every word. He gestured, argued. She shook her head, firm but trembling, until he handed her an envelope, identical to the one that had arrived in the mail, and left without waiting for a response. Marina stood there, holding the envelope and the bag of vegetables, taking deep breaths, trying to compose herself. That's when she saw him looking. Their eyes met across the noisy market, and in that moment, without words, he understood. The world she had left didn't accept that she was gone, and it was coming to get her. He crossed the market, passed between the stalls, and stopped beside her. "Are you okay?" She nodded, but her hands were trembling. "I am, just... It was unexpected." "Who was that?" "Someone from my family. They don't accept my choice." "And the envelope?" She looked at him, gauging how much she could trust, and then, with a gesture that seemed to cost her everything, she extended the envelope. He took it, opened it. Inside, there were legal documents, complicated language, stamps, signatures. But in the middle of it all, one line stood out. Petition for conservatorship due to incapacity to manage assets. He read it twice to make sure he understood. They're trying to say you're not capable of deciding about your own life? Marina laughed, but it was a joyless laugh. It's their legal way of bringing me back. If they can prove I'm incapacitated, they can force me to return, to take on responsibilities, to be who they need me to be. Anger surged in him in a way he hadn't expected. Anger for her. Anger against people he didn't even know, but already hated for doing this. For not understanding, or worse, for understanding perfectly, that she just wanted to live. They can do that? They can try, she said, putting the envelope back in her bag. And they probably will succeed if I don't have a way to prove that I'm fine, that I made a conscious choice, that I'm not crazy for wanting a different life. You're not crazy. I know, she whispered, but to them, choosing this life instead of what I had, it's madness. And maybe, from their point of view, it truly is. They walked back to the street in silence, each carrying their groceries and their thoughts. When they reached her house, he stopped on the sidewalk. You don't have to face this alone, he said. Marina looked at him with an intensity that hurt. But I am alone. I always have been. That's the truth I took so long to accept. Not here. Here you have neighbors. You have Mrs. Jenkins. You have Mr. Peterson. You have Laura. You have... He hesitated but decided to say, you have me. She closed her eyes, took a deep breath, and when she opened them again, there were tears there. Not tears of sadness. Tears of someone who had forgotten what it was like to have someone on their side without asking for anything in return. Thank you, she said, and this time the word carried enough weight to last a long time. That night, he couldn't sleep. He kept thinking about the envelope, the documents, the man in the suit's face. He kept thinking about how cruel the world could be to someone who simply wanted to choose their own path. And he kept thinking, most of all, about how much time Marina had before that world arrived, with full force to tear her away. Laura had gone to bed early, tired from school and her drawings. The house was too quiet, the kind of silence that amplifies thoughts instead of calming them. He made coffee, even though it was late at night, and sat on the porch with the hot mug in his hands. The street was empty, but he knew it wasn't as empty as it seemed. There were eyes watching, there always were. It was only a matter of time before the pressure increased, before the polite attempts turned into something more direct, more dangerous. He saw when the light in the blue house came on, Marina couldn't sleep either. He thought about going over there, but hesitated. He didn't want to seem intrusive. He didn't want her to think he was watching, but he was worried, genuinely worried. That's when her door opened and she came out wrapped in a thin coat, barefoot. She crossed the street slowly, as if each step cost effort. When she got closer, he saw that she had been crying. Her eyes were swollen, her face pale. "Can't sleep either?" she asked, her voice hoarse. "Me neither." She sat on the step beside him, hugging her knees. They stayed like that for a while, in silence, just existing beside each other. Sometimes that's what you need. Not answers, not advice, just company. "I'm so scared," she whispered finally. "Scared to go back. Scared to lose this place. Scared that everything I've managed to build will be ripped away from me." "You're not going back. Not if you don't want to." "But what if they force me? What if they find a legal way to compel me?" "Then we fight. With lawyers, with witnesses, with everything it takes." She looked at him, and there was so much vulnerability in that look that it hurt. "Why are you doing this? You don't even really know me." He thought about the answer. He could give several reasons, but he chose the most honest one. "Because I see you trying. I see you waking up every day and choosing to continue even when you're scared, and that deserves to be protected." Her eyes welled up with tears, but she didn't let them fall. She just nodded, as if those words had given her something she desperately needed to hear. "Thank you," she whispered, "for believing in me when even I don't believe in myself." They stayed on the porch for a while longer, until the night chill began to set in and Marina went back inside. But before crossing the street, she turned. "If they really come, if they get too aggressive, do you promise me you'll protect Laura, that you won't let her get involved in this?" "I promise, but it won't get to that point." "How do you know?" "Because I won't let it." She smiled sadly but gratefully and walked away. He watched her go inside, wait for the light to come on, confirm she was safe. Only then did he go back into his own house, because he knew, with a certainty that hurt, what had happened at the market was just the beginning, the polite warning before the real storm. And when the storm came, it would be devastating. But he would be there, even if he didn't know exactly how, even if he didn't have all the answers. He would be there, because sometimes that's all you can do, be present when everything falls apart, and hope that presence is enough. The discovery happened by chance, as important things often do. He was fixing the fence that divided their two backyards when a strong December wind blew some papers from her porch onto his garage roof. They were loose sheets, probably left on a small plastic table she kept outside. When he climbed up to retrieve them before the predicted rain arrived, he saw they weren't ordinary papers. They were statements, financial documents, and the numbers printed there made no sense. Values with many zeros, investments, properties, names of companies he'd seen in TV commercials, and her last name, the true, full one, printed on every page, Marina Christine Hayes. He stood on the garage roof, holding those papers, feeling the wind against his face, trying to process what he was seeing. It wasn't just wealth, it was the kind of wealth that changes countries. The kind that buys influence, the kind that builds entire hospitals just to have its name on the inauguration plaques. And she was here in a rented blue house, buying tomatoes at the market and learning to bake homemade cakes. He climbed down slowly, the papers folded in his hands, and knocked on her door. When Marina opened it, she saw what he held, and all the blood drained from her face. "The wind carried them away," he explained, extending the documents. "They were on my roof." She took the papers with trembling hands, looked at them, then at him. "You read them?" It wasn't a question, it was a statement. "I did," he admitted. He wasn't going to lie. "But it doesn't change anything." "How does it not change?" "Anything?" she asked, desperation in her voice. "Now you know. You know where I came from. You know what I left behind. You know I'm—" "What?" he interrupted. "Rich? Powerful? From a family that decides important things? So what? Does that change who you are now?" She stood in silence, clutching the papers to her chest as if they were an accusation. "It changes how you look at me," she whispered. He took a deep breath, choosing his words carefully. "Marina, I've spent the last few weeks watching you learn to use a washing machine, watching you burn rice and try again, watching you be proud of successfully changing a light bulb on your own. That's the person I know, not a last name on a piece of paper, and it's that person who matters." Her eyes welled up with tears. No one ever said that before." He shrugged, uncomfortable with the raw emotion. "Maybe because you never had real neighbors before." She laughed, crying at the same time, and it was a sound so human, so genuine, that it broke something in him. It made him realize that, at some point in the last few weeks, he'd come to care about her, not as a neighbor, as a person, as someone who deserved to be defended. "Come in," she asked, opening the door completely for the first time. "I think it's time you understood why I'm here, why I ran, and why they won't stop until they take me back." The house inside was exactly as he imagined, almost empty. Few pieces of furniture, all simple, no decorations. It looked like a temporary place, a hideout, not a home. She offered coffee, but he declined. They sat facing each other at the small kitchen table, and she began to tell her story. "My father built an empire," she began, her voice low but firm. "It started with a steel mill and ended with stakes in banks, real estate firms, even energy companies. When he died 2 years ago, he left everything divided between me and my brother. But he also left a condition. I would have to take on management responsibilities. I would have to marry someone approved by the family. I would have to maintain the image. I would have to be property," he completed. She nodded. "I tried, I swear I tried. I went to meetings, smiled at parties, accepted the fiancé they chose. But every day was suffocating. Every decision was watched. Every gesture was measured. I wasn't a person. I was a piece on a chessboard that other people played. And you ran away." "I ran. I took only what fit in a suitcase, left a letter saying I renounced everything and simply came here. I chose this town because no one in my family would look in a place like this. I chose this street because it seemed real. And for a few weeks it was perfect. I was nobody, and nobody was exactly what I always wanted to be. But they found you. They always do. There are private investigators, lawyers, people whose only job is to bring me back, because as long as I'm gone, the inheritance is in dispute. My brother can't take everything on alone. And there are interests, agreements, commitments that depend on me being there. So they'll use any legal argument to force me. Mental incapacity is just the beginning. If that doesn't work, they'll try other things. They'll say I'm being manipulated, that I had a breakdown, that I need protection. But you don't need it. No, I just need peace. To be able to wake up without having to be perfect. To be able to fail without it appearing in the newspapers. To be able to live." They were silent for a moment, the weight of it all hanging in the air. "And the fiancé?" he asked, not knowing why, but feeling it was important. Marina made a face. "Richard, son of a senator, an arranged marriage since I was 16. He doesn't love me, I don't love him. But the marriage unites two fortunes, creates a political alliance, opens doors. That's all it is, a transaction. And he agrees with that? He doesn't care. For him it's convenient. He has his life, I'd have mine, and in the eyes of the world, we'd be the perfect couple. But I can't do it. I can't pretend my whole life." He looked at her, saw the exhaustion in her eyes, the burden of having carried that alone for so long. "You need a lawyer," he said. "Someone who understands these things, who can help you formalize your choice in a way they can't contest." "I don't have any money. I left. Everything. I only brought enough for a few months' rent. There are lawyers who work pro bono, or we'll figure something out, but you can't face this without legal help." She laughed tiredly. "You don't even really know me. Why are you doing this?" He thought about the answer. He could say it was because it was the right thing to do, or because he knew what it was like to feel trapped in a life you didn't choose, or because Laura had grown fond of her and he couldn't bear to see his daughter sad. But the truth was simpler and more complicated. "Because you deserve it," he said finally, "and because if I don't help, I'll spend the rest of my life wondering what would have happened if I had done things differently." Marina closed her eyes, took a deep breath, and when she opened them again, there was a determination there that he hadn't seen before. "Okay," she said. "Let's try. But you need to know this is going to get ugly. They don't give up. And anyone on my side becomes a target too." "Let them try," he replied, and there was a conviction in a voice that surprised even himself. In the following days, the entire street began to realize that something big was happening. The strange cars increased. Sometimes there were 3, 4, all parked at different points, creating a surveillance network. Neighbors started asking questions. Mrs. Jenkins, always observant, got straight to the point. "Is that girl in trouble?" "She is," he answered honestly. "But we're going to help her." "Then count us in," Mrs. Jenkins said, and it was a relief to realize he wasn't alone in this. Mr. Peterson, the baker, started noting down suspicious license plates. The teenager on the corner, who everyone thought paid attention to nothing, began to notify them when he saw someone strange lurking around. The neighborhood, without realizing it, had become a small protection network around Marina. And she, for the first time since she arrived, seemed to believe that maybe, just maybe, she wasn't completely alone in this fight. But the letter that arrived on Friday of that week changed everything. It was an official notification. A hearing was scheduled. A petition for conservatorship would be reviewed by a judge. She had 3 weeks to defend herself, and the clock began to tick. The 3 weeks that followed were like living in a pressure cooker. Each day brought new tension, a veiled threat, an attempt to make Marina give up. First came the letters, then the phone calls. She had managed to keep her old cell phone hidden, but somehow they got the number. Then came the visits, always polite on the surface, always threatening underneath. He accompanied her to a visit at the public defender's office. The assigned lawyer, Ms. Sarah Wilson, was young, but had the tired eyes of someone who had seen a lot. When Marina explained the situation, she nodded as if it were nothing new. "Powerful families use this kind of strategy all the time," Sarah explained, flipping through the documents. "Conservatorship for incapacity is a legal way to regain control over someone. But to get it, they'll need to prove you're not capable of making decisions about your own life, and seeing you here, lucid, coherent, with a job." "I don't have a job," Marina interrupted, her voice low. "Not yet," he said, looking at her. "But you will." Marina turned to him, confused. "What do you mean?" "Mr. Peterson needs help at the bakery, and Mrs. Jenkins is looking for someone to help with her sewing. You can do both, a few hours a day at each place. Small wages, but it's a job. It's proof that you are integrated, productive, capable." Sarah smiled for the first time. "That helps a lot. The more proof of a normal, independent life, the better. Do you have neighbors who can testify on her behalf?" "The whole street does," he replied, confident. And they did. When he explained the situation to the neighbors, briefly, just the essentials, the response was unanimous. Mrs. Jenkins said she would personally go to the hearing if necessary. Mr. Peterson offered the bakery as a reference. Even the young man on the corner, whom no one took very seriously, said he could help with whatever was needed. Marina, hearing all of it, broke down in silent tears. Not from sadness, but from something she couldn't name. It was like discovering that even without realizing it, she had built something she never had: community. But the pressures increased in proportion to the support. Richard, the fiancé, appeared in person. He arrived in an imported car, an impeccable suit, with the posture of someone accustomed to getting what he wants. He rang her doorbell on a Tuesday afternoon when he was at the garage and Laura was at school. Marina froze when she saw who it was. She thought about not opening, but she knew he wouldn't leave. So she opened it, keeping the door only slightly ajar. "Marina," Richard said, his voice smooth but calculated. "Are you all right?" "I am. You don't look it. You look tired. You look lost." She tightened her fingers on the doorknob. "I'm not lost. I know exactly where I am and why." He gave a condescending smile, the kind of smile powerful people give when they think they're dealing with a stubborn child. "Marina, be reasonable. You have responsibilities. An entire fortune depends on you. People depend on you. You can't just abandon everything because you're going through a rough patch." It's not a rough patch, it's a choice. Choice, he repeated, savoring the word as if it were absurd. You think you have a choice? Marina, you were born into a family like ours. That comes with privileges, yes, but also with duties. You can't run from that. It's who you are. No, it's who you want me to be. And I'm not that person anymore. Richard sighed, losing his polite patience. If you don't come back willingly, we'll do this the hard way. The hearing is scheduled. We have doctors who will testify you're having a psychotic episode. We have evidence of erratic behavior. We have everything we need to bring you back. Erratic behavior, she repeated, incredulous. You call my wanting to live in peace erratic? I call it erratic for you to abandon a life of comfort to come live in a place like this. He gestured around disdainfully. Look at you, Marina. Look where you are. This isn't a life. This is desperation. That's when he showed up. He had seen the car on the street. He had recognized that this wasn't just another investigator. It was someone important, someone dangerous. So he dropped his work and rushed across the street. When he arrived, he saw Marina with trembling hands and Richard at the gate with an expression of superiority. He placed himself between the two without asking permission. Did she ask you to leave? He asked directly. Richard looked at him as one looks at an annoying insect. And you are? The neighbor. And you are on her property unwelcome. Richard let out a humorless laugh. Neighbor. How quaint. He turned his attention back to Marina. Is this what you chose? People like this, instead of your own family? Family is who stays when you need them, Marina said, her voice trembling but firm, not who traps you when you want to be free. Richard turned red. He wasn't used to being confronted, and he certainly wasn't used to losing. You'll regret this, he said coldly. And when the judgment comes down, when you're declared incapacitated, you'll come back, whether you want to or not. And all these people you think are your family will see they're nothing but pawns in a game they don't even understand. He left, leaving a trail of menace in the air. When the car disappeared, Marina collapsed. He held her, let her cry on his shoulder, feeling the fragility of a woman who'd been trying to be too strong for too long. Is he right? She asked between sobs. Am I putting all of you at risk for a fight I can't win? No, he said firmly. You're fighting for your life, and that's not selfishness, that's survival. But that night, when he returned home and saw Laura sleeping peacefully, he wondered if he was doing the right thing. If he wasn't exposing his daughter to a dangerous world, if he shouldn't retreat while there was still time. But then he remembered Marina's gaze when she said she had finally found peace. He remembered how she smiled the first time she managed to bake a good loaf of bread. He remembered how she played with Laura, teaching the girl to draw clouds. And he understood that, even if it cost something, it was worth it, because some fights aren't about winning. They're about not giving up on who you became when you decided to fight. The neighborhood also felt the pressure. Cars began to park in front of the houses of those who had offered to help. Nothing explicitly threatening, just presence, just silent intimidation. Mrs. Jenkins received an anonymous phone call saying she should mind her own business. Mr. Peterson found his car tire slashed twice in the same week. The young man on the corner was approached by a man in a suit who just wanted to ask a few questions about the neighbor. It was psychological warfare, and it was effective. Some neighbors began to back off, not because they didn't care, but because they were scared. Legitimate fear of getting involved in something bigger than they could handle. But others stood firm, and it was in these that Marina learned to trust. It was in these that she found the strength to continue. The week before the hearing, Sarah managed a small victory. The conservatorship petition was reclassified. Now, instead of total incapacity, it was merely Temporary partial conservatorship. It was still bad, still intrusive, but it was better. It was a loophole. It was hope. "They're backing down," Sarah explained. "Probably because they realized you have support, that you're not isolated. That complicates their argument, but don't celebrate yet. They'll try other things. They always do." And they did. 3 days before the hearing, an article appeared in a tabloid newspaper. It wasn't large, just a small note, but it read, "Heiress to the Hayes fortune missing. Family concerned about mental state." It had an old photo of Marina, from when she still smiled for cameras at events, and it had insinuations, words like breakdown, concerning behavior, needs help. It was a lie, but it was a published lie, and a published lie he knew had power. Marina read the article in silence, her hands trembling. Then she carefully folded the newspaper and put it in a drawer. "They want me to give up," she said, her voice firm despite her watery eyes. "They want me to believe it's not worth it, but you know what I learned living here? That being worth it has nothing to do with being easy. It has to do with being true." He smiled, proud. "Then we keep going. We keep going," she agreed, but the confidence in her words didn't erase the fear in her eyes. He saw it, saw how she looked at the street more often, how she jumped at the slightest unexpected noise, how she slept less and less. The pressure was working, even if she wouldn't admit it. The night before the hearing, Mrs. Jenkins organized a dinner at her house. She invited Marina, him and Laura, Mr. Peterson and half a dozen other neighbors who had committed to helping. It wasn't elaborate, just a pasta bake, bread, salad, soda. But there was something about it that went beyond the food. It was unity. It was their way of saying, without grand words or dramatic gestures, "We're with you. You're not alone in this." Marina barely ate. She pushed the food around her plate, smiled when someone spoke to her, participated in the conversation when necessary. But he saw she was distant, lost in thoughts about what tomorrow would bring. When dinner ended and people started to leave, Marina stayed to help Mrs. Jenkins wash the dishes. He heard the conversation from the living room, not wanting to listen, but impossible not to catch. "Are you scared, dear?" Mrs. Jenkins asked, as direct as always. "I am, very." "Of what exactly?" Marina took a while to answer. "Of going back to that life and discovering I never really managed to leave. Of realizing that all this was just a pause, a dream that will end when I wake up." "Look at me," Mrs. Jenkins urged, and through the window he saw the older woman hold Marina's face in both hands. "You are real. This place is real. This life you've built is real. And tomorrow, when you walk into that courthouse, you're going to show everyone that choice is a right, not a privilege of the powerful. Understand?" Marina nodded, her eyes full of tears. "I understand. And even if it goes wrong, even if they manage to take you, you'll know you tried, that you fought. And no one can take that from you." When Marina left Mrs. Jenkins' house, he was waiting on the sidewalk. He didn't say anything. He just walked beside her to the blue house. "Want to come in?" she offered hesitantly. "I do." Inside, the house was neater than before. Small personal touches had appeared. A colorful cushion on the sofa, a small picture on the wall, plants in the window. Signs that she had started to believe she could stay. They sat on the worn sofa she had bought at a used furniture store and just stayed like that, in silence, letting the weight of tomorrow hang in the air without trying to push it away. "If it goes wrong," Marina began, but he interrupted. "It won't. But if it does, then we'll find another way. There's always another way." She looked at him, and in that gaze, there was so much hope mixed with so much fear that his chest tightened. "Do you promise you won't give up on me even if I lose?" "I promise." And he promised not just with words, but with the way he held her hand, firm, secure, present. She rested her head on his shoulder, just for a moment, allowing herself to be fragile, allowing herself to need someone, and he stayed there, motionless, letting her rest, even if just for a few minutes, from the burden of having to be strong all the time. When he left, it was past midnight. The street was silent. But it was a different kind of silence. It was no longer threatening. It was almost solemn, as if the street itself was holding its breath, waiting to see what tomorrow would bring. He went inside, checked on Laura sleeping, lay in his own bed. And for the first time in weeks, he slept deeply. Not because he was less worried, but because he had done everything he could do. He had given everything he had to give. Now it was up to justice, to truth, to luck, to all those things you can't control, but still have to trust. And so, scared but not giving up, they waited for the day of the hearing to arrive, knowing that, regardless of the outcome, something fundamental had already changed. Marina had proven to herself that she was capable of fighting, and he had proven to himself that there was still room in his heart to care for someone beyond himself and his daughter. And maybe, just maybe, that was already a victory, small but real. The courthouse was chilly that morning, despite the heat outside. Marina wore a simple outfit, jeans, a white blouse, flats, but carried a dignity no expensive clothing could fabricate. He stood beside her, in a dress shirt Laura had helped iron, and on the other side was Sarah, with a folder full of documents and an expression that tried to convey confidence. Across the room, they were there. Richard, in a dark suit, impeccable posture. Marina's brother, whom she had mentioned, but he had never seen, a man in his early 40s, greying hair, a calculating look. 2 expensive lawyers, the kind that bill by the minute, and a psychiatrist hired by the family, holding a report he didn't even need to read to know what it said. State of emotional instability, need for supervision, temporary incapacity for asset management decisions. The judge entered, a woman in her 50s, hair pulled back, glasses, a neutral expression of someone who had seen every possible variation of human drama. She sat down, briefly leafed through the files, and began. We are here to review the petition for temporary partial conservatorship over Ms. Marina Christine Hayes. The family alleges incapacity for asset management and making important decisions. The defense argues that it is a conscious lifestyle choice. Let's hear the arguments. The family's lawyer began, a firm voice, impeccable posture, an argument constructed like perfectly fitted puzzle pieces. He spoke of abandoned responsibilities, of erratic behavior, of a woman who, in a clear moment of imbalance, left everything to live in a situation of vulnerability. He used words like protection, well-being, best interest of the ward. He made it all sound so reasonable that even he, listening, almost believed it might make sense. Then came the medical report. The psychiatrist had never spoken to Marina. He based everything on family reports and remote behavioral analysis. He concluded there were indications of a dissociative episode and a need for supervision. When he finished, he implied that Marina was basically a lost person who needed to be rescued from Miu herself. Then it was Sarah's turn. She stood up, straightened her papers, and began with a simple question. Ms. Hayes, can you please tell me where you are currently residing? Marina answered, her voice clear. 237 Acacia Drive, Hopewell Gardens neighborhood. And how do you pay your rent? I work at Mr. Peterson's bakery and do sewing for Mrs. Jenkins. I earn enough to pay rent, food, and basic expenses. Do you make decisions independently about what to eat, when to work, how to spend your money? Yes, all decisions are mine. And do you feel incapable of making these decisions? Marina looked directly at the judge when she answered, No, For the first time in my life, I feel capable of deciding who I want to be." Sarah paused, letting that echo. "Your Honor, I have brought witnesses who interact daily with my client. With your permission, I would like to hear from them." The judge nodded and Mrs. Jenkins was called. She entered timidly, uncomfortable with the formal environment, but when she began to speak, her voice was firm. "Marina is one of the most grounded people I've ever met. She works diligently, pays everything on time, helps her neighbors. I don't see anything wrong with her. I just see a young woman who wants to live in peace." "And do you notice any behavior that suggests incapacity?" "Incapacity." Mrs. Jenkins frowned. "Honey, she learns fast, does things carefully, doesn't need anyone to explain things twice. If that's incapacity, then I want to see what competence looks like." Even the judge almost smiled. Then it was Mr. Peterson. He said Marina never missed a day, never arrived late, treated customers politely, learned recipes quickly. If she's incapable, then half my employees over the years were incapable too. And my bakery's been open for 30 years. And then he was called. When he stood up, he felt the weight of their stares. Richard glared at him with disdain, Marina's brother with clinical curiosity. But Marina looked at him with something different. Trust, as if she believed he would say the right thing. He walked to the front, took the oath, and sat down. "Are you a neighbor of Ms. Hayes?" "I am. I live across the street." "And have you interacted with her daily?" "Yes, ever since she moved to our street." "Did you notice any behavior that you considered concerning?" He thought carefully before answering. "I did, yes. I noticed a woman who didn't know how to use a washing machine and learned. I noticed a woman who burned her first batch of rice and didn't give up. I noticed a woman who was afraid of everything and started to be less afraid. To me, that's not incapacity, that's courage." The family's lawyer stood up. "Objection, Your Honor. The witness is offering a personal opinion, not reporting facts." "Sustained," the judge said. "Sir, please stick to the facts." Sarah rephrased. "Could you describe any specific situation that demonstrates my client's capacity for decision-making?" He thought of several, but he chose one. There was an envelope, an official document. She received it, read it, understood what it meant, and made the decision to respond through a lawyer. That doesn't seem like the action of someone incapable. It seems like the action of someone who knows exactly what they're doing. And regarding social interaction, does she interact normally? She does. She talks with neighbors, helps when needed, participates in the life of the street. My daughter, who is 9, likes her, and children usually know when someone isn't doing well. It was then that the family's lawyer had his chance to cross-examine. "Sir," he began, his voice velvety but sharp, "don't you find it strange that a woman from a wealthy family with access to everything chooses to live in a rented house, working odd jobs, giving up millions?" "I do, but strange isn't synonymous with incapable. It's synonymous with different, and she has the right to be different." "Do you not consider that this decision could be the result of a psychological disorder? I'm not a doctor, but I know people who went crazy from having too much, and I know people who found themselves when they lost everything. Marina seems to be the second type." Richard stood up, irritated. "This is absurd. He's just a mechanic. What does he know about—" The judge banged her gavel. "Silence. You will have your opportunity to speak." And he did. Richard spoke about responsibilities, about how Marina was abandoning duties, about how she was clearly suffering and needed help. But the more he spoke, the more obvious it became that he wasn't worried about her. He was worried about what her absence caused: business instability, a damaged image, paralyzed lawsuits. Her brother was more subtle. He spoke of fraternal love, of genuine concern, of wanting only the best for his sister. But he made a mistake, a small but significant mistake. Marina was always fragile, he said. Since childhood, she needed protection. She never could handle pressure on her own. Sarah seized the opportunity. So you confirm that your sister always lived under family protection? That she was never allowed to make decisions on her own? He hesitated, realizing the trap too late. Well, she always had support. Support or control? That is a distortion of what I said. Is it? Because it seems to me that we are facing a woman who, for the first time, is making decisions on her own. And the family, instead of respecting that, calls it incapacity. Convenient, wouldn't you say? The judge called for silence again, but something had shifted in the air. Finally, Marina was called to speak. She stood up, walked to the front, and when she began, her voice was that of someone who had found something precious and wasn't going to let anyone take it away. I am not crazy. I am not having a breakdown. I am not running from reality. I am for the first time living in it. The life I had wasn't mine. It belonged to a last name, to expectations, to people who decided who I should be before I even had a voice to say who I wanted to be. Here, on this street, in this simple house, working on things that to you may seem small, I am me. And that is not a sickness, it is a cure. The silence that followed was profound. The judge looked at the documents, at the lawyers, at Marina. Then she adjusted her glasses and spoke. I will review everything carefully and render my decision within 48 hours. Hearing adjourned. When they walked out, Marina was trembling. Not from fear, from emotional exhaustion. He held her hand, a simple gesture, but one that said everything that needed to be said. She was not alone. Sarah gave a tired smile. It went well, very well. But I can't promise anything. These cases are always unpredictable. They drove home in silence and waited, because that was all they could do. Wait for truth to outweigh power. Wait for humanity to matter more than money. Wait, against all odds, for justice to truly be just. The 2 days of waiting were the longest. Marina barely left the house, looking at the door as if the judgment could arrive at any moment. He tried to maintain his routine, but was just as anxious as she was. Laura sensed the tension, but had the childlike wisdom not to ask what she couldn't fully understand. She simply stayed closer to Marina, drawing beside her, offering small comforts without words. On the afternoon of the second day, Sarah's phone rang. She was at the bakery when she received the call, and her heart pounded. Before she even answered, it was the courthouse. The decision was ready. He dropped everything and went to get Marina. He found her sitting on the porch, looking at the street as if memorizing every detail, as if she needed to hold on to it in case it was the last time. When she saw his expression, she stood slowly. "It's out?" she asked, her voice almost a whisper. "It's out. Sarah's already going to pick it up. Do you want me to go with you?" She nodded, unable to speak. They went together in silence, in his car that squeaked. On turns, and had a torn seat he always promised to fix. At the public defender's office, Sarah waited for them with an expression he couldn't decipher. It wasn't exactly joy, but it wasn't defeat either. "Sit," she requested, pointing to the chairs. Marina sat on the edge, her hands clasped, white from squeezing so tight. "The judge denied the conservatorship petition," Sarah said, and Marina let out a sound that was half laugh, half sob. "She found no evidence of incapacity, that your choice is conscious and that you demonstrate full capacity to manage your own life. So it's over?" Marina asked, barely believing it. "Not completely," Sarah qualified. "They can appeal, they probably will, but that kind of appeal takes time. And in the meantime, you are free, officially, legally free." Marina leaned back in the chair, breathing as if she had run miles. He placed his hand on her shoulder, feeling the tension escaping in waves. "There's one more thing," Sarah continued. The judge noted in the ruling that she considered the neighbor's testimony decisive. She said that when an entire community vouches for someone's sanity and integration, it carries more weight than remote assessments. Basically, your street saved you. Marina began to cry, not tears of sadness, but of such profound relief that it needed an outlet. He let her cry there, in the simple small room of the public defender's office, while Sarah discreetly pretended to organize papers to give them some privacy. When they returned to the street, it was already late afternoon. The sun was low, painting everything orange and gold. Before they could reach her house, Mrs. Jenkins appeared at her gate, anxious. "So?" "We won," he said, smiling. Mrs. Jenkins shouted with joy, called Mr. Peterson, who was passing by with grocery bags from the market, and in minutes the news had spread throughout the entire street. People came out of their houses, clapping, hugging Marina, as if it were a collective victory, because it was. It was the victory of a group of ordinary people who had chosen to stand on the right side, even when it was harder. Laura arrived from school and found everyone on the street. When she heard, she jumped onto Marina's neck with that pure joy only a child has. And Marina held the girl, laughing and crying at the same time, as if this was everything she had always wanted and never knew she needed. That night, when the street returned to silence, he was on his porch, drinking coffee, when Marina crossed. She carried a small package in her hands. "May I sit?" "Of course." She sat on the step beside him. They stayed in silence for a while, just feeling the cool evening air. "Thank you," she said finally, "for everything, for not giving up on me when it would have been easier. It wasn't easy for you either, but you didn't give up, because I had you, and Mrs. Jenkins, and Mr. Peterson, and Laura, and everyone. Without that, I would have—" She paused, took a deep breath. "I would have gone back, not because they were right, but because loneliness would have defeated me. But you didn't let me be alone." He took a sip of his coffee, thinking about how much things had changed since that afternoon when she asked for help with a broken car. "What are you going to do now?" he asked. "Live," she replied, simply. "Work at the bakery, do sewing, wake up without fear, sleep in peace. It seems small, but for me it's everything. And if they come back, if they don't give up, then I'll fight again. But now I know I'm not alone, and that changes everything." She extended the package to him. "This is for you, and for Laura." He opened it. It was a drawing, a good, professional drawing done in charcoal. It showed the street, the houses, the trees, and in the center, two figures, him and Marina, sitting exactly where they were now, on the porch, with Laura playing in the backyard in the background. "You draw," he said, impressed. "I used to. I stopped when they told me it was a waste of time, that I had more important things to do, but I started again, and I found I still remember. I found I still can." He looked at the drawing, saw the care in each stroke, the emotion in each shadow. "It's beautiful." "It's true. Which is better than beautiful." They stayed there for a while longer in comfortable silence, until Laura appeared at the door asking Marina to help with a science lesson, and Marina went, as if she had always been part of that small family, as if she had always belonged to that place. The following weeks brought a new routine. Marina continued working, integrating more and more, gradually losing that air of someone always expecting to be expelled. The cars stopped appearing. The letters stopped arriving. Either they had given up or they were just waiting for the right moment. But either way, she had learned to live without constant fear. Richard tried one more time. He showed up one evening, alone, without lawyers or threats. Just him, asking to talk. Marina agreed, but insisted it be in his presence, the neighbor. Safety or witness, it didn't matter. "I came to apologize," Richard began, and he seemed sincere, or too tired to keep pretending. Not for the legal fight. For that I had reasons. But for not having tried to understand before. For having assumed you were wrong just because you chose differently. Marina listened without interrupting. "Are you happy here?" he asked, and this time it was genuine curiosity, not judgment. "I am. For the first time, I am." Richard nodded, as if finally understanding something that had always eluded him. "Then I'm happy for you, truly." There was no dramatic reconciliation, no hugs or promises of friendship, just a silent understanding that sometimes people want different things and that's okay. Richard left, and this time it seemed definitive. Her brother never came, never called, but also never tried anything legal again. It was his way of accepting distance, and for Marina, that was enough. Months later, on an autumn afternoon, he found her on her porch. She was planting flowers, getting her hands dirty with soil, with a small but true smile on her face. "Flowers?" he asked, surprised. "I thought you didn't like plants." "I didn't, because someone always took care of them for me, but now I want to care. I want to see something I planted grow. I want to get my hands dirty." He sat on the step, watching her work. "You've changed," he observed. "I have. Or maybe I just found myself. I don't know if there's a difference." "There is. To change is to become a different person. To find yourself is to become who you always were inside." She smiled, agreeing. "Then I found myself." Laura came running, showing off a good grade on her math test. Marina celebrated as if it were her own achievement, and at that moment, he realized she had become part of them, not as someone who needed to be saved, but as someone who chose to stay. And that made all the difference. That night, after Marina left and Laura fell asleep, he stood on his porch looking at the blue house across the street. The lights were on, the curtains open for the first time. There was nothing left to hide. There was no more fear of what might come in, just life happening, simple and true. He thought about how it all began. A broken car, an ordinary afternoon, a gesture of neighborliness, and how it had transformed into something much greater, a struggle, a victory, a family not of blood but of choice, and choice, he had learned, weighed more. He also thought about how life has these ironies. Marina had fled a fortune to find wealth. Not the kind you deposit in a bank, but the kind you feel in your chest when you wake up and know the day is yours, that the choices are yours, that life, with all its problems and difficulties, is genuinely yours. And he, who always thought his life was too small, too limited, discovered he had room for big things, for important fights, for making a difference in someone's life, not with money or power, but with presence, with steadfastness, with the simple decision not to turn his back when someone needed help. Laura had gained something too, an unlikely aunt, someone who taught her to draw, who listened to her school stories with genuine attention, who showed that women could be strong even when they were scared, especially when they were scared. The entire street had changed, in fact. It had learned that being neighbors isn't just living close by, it's being close. When things get tough, it's caring when it would be easier to ignore. It's choosing the right side even when the wrong side has more power. Mrs. Jenkins said, a few days later, when they were all having coffee at Mr. Peterson's bakery, "That girl taught us more than she learned here." And she was right. Marina had shown that courage is not the absence of fear. It's doing what needs to be done, even with fear screaming at you to stop. The following months brought a stability no one expected. Marina continued working, began getting better paying sewing commissions, sold some drawings at a local art fair. Nothing spectacular, but sufficient, more than sufficient. She started laughing more often. The kind of laugh that comes from deep inside, unfiltered, uncalculated. She started making plans for the future, small things like renovating the kitchen, planting a larger garden, maybe adopting a cat. plans from someone who intends to stay, and she stayed. Not because she had no choice, but because she chose. Every day she woke up and chose again. She chose that life, that street, those people. Sometimes, late at night when everything was quiet, he thought about how unpredictable life was, how a simple gesture could change everything, how you never know when you decide to help someone how far that decision will lead. He had fixed a car, and, without knowing it, he had helped fix a life. Or perhaps Marina had fixed his. Or perhaps, and this was the most probable truth, they had fixed each other. A year after the day of the hearing, the street threw a small party. Nothing official, just the neighbors gathering on a Saturday afternoon, each bringing something, creating that joyful chaos of mixed food and overlapping conversations that marks a real community. Marina was there, laughing at one of Mr. Peterson's jokes, helping Mrs. Jenkins serve snacks, playing with Laura and the other children. Integrated, belonging, not the rich lady who ran away, but simply Marina, the neighbor, the friend, part of them. He watched everything from a distance for a moment, a beer in hand, the late afternoon sun on his face. And he felt something he hadn't felt in a long time. Contentment. Not euphoric happiness, but that deep satisfaction of knowing that things were where they should be, that however imperfect it was right. Marina saw him looking and crossed the yard to him. "What are you thinking about?" she asked. "How strange life is." Strange good or strange bad? Strange good, definitely strange good. She smiled in that way that lit up her whole face. "Yeah, I agree." They stood there side by side, watching the party, the neighborhood, life happening, and they didn't need to say anything more. Because sometimes, when things finally make sense, words are unnecessary. The street eventually returned to the silence of the night, but it was a different silence now. It wasn't the silence of hiding. It was the silence of, finally, being able to rest. It was the silence of knowing that no matter what happened, you weren't alone. And in that silence, as the stars slowly appeared in the sky, as the gentle wind stirred the leaves of the trees, as life followed its peaceful course on that simple street where extraordinary things had happened, he knew. Sometimes the most important stories aren't about grand deeds or epic changes. They're about ordinary people doing what's right, even when it's hard. They're about finding courage not to be a hero, but to be human. They're about choosing to stay when it would be easier to leave. They're about discovering that family isn't who shares blood, but who shares a struggle. That home isn't where you were born, but where you choose to belong. That wealth isn't what you have, but who you have. And that, in the end, the victories that matter most are those no one sees in the newspapers, but that change everything for those who live them. And this story, simple as it was, had been worth every second, every tear, every fear, every moment of doubt, because it had proven something fundamental, that goodness still exists, that community still exists, that there are still people willing to fight for what's right, even when what's right comes with no reward. And maybe, just maybe, that's the only thing that truly matters. If this story touched your heart, like, comment, and subscribe. Stories like this deserve to be remembered.